The gymnasium smelled of wax and anticipation, a heavy mix that clung to my skin as I stood at its edge. My hands were clasped fingers digging into my palms, the pain a small anchor to keep me steady. Overhead, fluorescent lights buzzed, casting sharp shadows on the polished floor. My daughter Lily stood on the stage, 16 and radiant, her cheeks flushed as she accepted her award for academic excellence. Her hands trembled, clutching the certificate, and my heart swelled with a pride so fierce it hurt. But around me, the air was thick with whispers, their edges jagged, slicing through the applause. They weren't about Lily. They were about me, Ava Miller. A voice sneered low but deliberate from the row behind. Always alone, isn't she? No ring, no story. Just nothing. It was Monica, the PTA president, her tone dripping with disdain like she'd bitten into something rotten. Her friends tittered, their gold earrings glinting as they leaned closer, feeding on her words. I didn't turn. I kept my eyes fixed on Lily on the way her smile flickered under the spotlight. But Monica's voice was a blade, and it found its mark. My chest tightened, a familiar ache blooming beneath my ribs. They hadn't saved me a seat. I'd arrived early, my navy dress ironed, smooth my hair, pinned back with care, hoping tonight might be different. Hoping I could slip into the crowd, unnoticed, just another proud parent. But when I reached the reserved section, the usher, a young woman with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, had scanned me like I was an error in her system. "Oh, Ms. Miller," she'd said, her voice too bright. We weren't sure you'd come." She gestured to a folding chair in the back, wedged beside a pile of dusty gym mats. I'd knotted my lips pressed tight and sat without protest, my purse a small weight on my lap, my heart sinking into that hollow place I knew too well. I'm Ava Miller, 48 years old, mother to Lily, my only star in a sky gone dark. To this town, I'm a ghost. The woman in the modest house on Maple Street who shelves books at the library, who fades into the background at school events. They call me Spinster Burden Nobody sometimes to my face, sometimes in whispers they think I don't hear. They see a woman who never became anything, who lingers like an afterthought. They don't know me. They never have. The applause surged as Lily stepped off the stage, her smile wide but shy. I clapped my hands shaking, wanting to rise to call out to let her know I was here. But the weight of their gazes pinned me down. Monica leaned forward again, her voice louder, now meant to carry. "It's almost sad, isn't it, Lily? So bright, and her mother's, invisible." The laughter that followed was sharp a sound that clawed at my skin. My throat burned, but I didn't move. I'd learned long ago to swallow pain, to let it settle like a stone in my chest, heavy but silent. There was a time I wasn't this way, a time when my name meant something, when my presence shifted the air in rooms far from here. I had walked through fire, carried secrets that could topple nations, given orders that saved lives. But that was another life, one I'd buried deep, locked away for Lily's sake, for the promise of a quieter world. I chose this silence, this invisibility, knowing what it would cost. Most days I could bear it. I could walk through their pity, their scorn, and hold the truth inside me like a flame they'd never see. But tonight, in this gymnasium with Lily shining and their words cutting deeper than usual, the weight felt heavier. The ceremony stretched on a parade of awards for science, for debate, for leadership. Parents around me glowed their cameras, flashing their voices loud with boasts about college plans and bright futures. I sat still, my hands folded, my eyes tracing the ceiling's exposed beams, their lines like roads I'd once traveled. I wondered what it would feel like to be seen not as Ava, the quiet mother, but as the woman I'd been. The woman I still was in the parts of me I kept hidden. A memory flickered unbidden sand under my boots, the weight of a rifle in my hands, the crackle of a radio in my ear. I pushed it away, focusing on the present, on the gymnasium's hum, on Lily's silhouette in the crowd below. But the past clung to me, its edges sharp, reminding me of who I'd been before I chose this life, before I became nobody. The principal stepped to the podium, his tie slightly crooked, his voice amplified. "We have a special guest tonight," he said, pausing for effect. "A leader who's made our nation safer, stronger. Please welcome the Director of Homeland Security, Admiral James Callahan." The room erupted, hands clapping, heads craning. I froze. Callahan. That name, that voice. It was a ghost from a life I'd left behind. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face blank, my hands steady, my body still. He stepped onto the stage, tall and silver-haired, his uniform sharp, his presence a quiet command. The crowd leaned forward, eager, but I pressed myself back, willing the shadows to swallow me. I hadn't seen him in 20 years. Not since the days when my name was spoken in hushed tones, when I was more than a forgotten mother in a small town. I prayed he wouldn't see me, wouldn't remember. I couldn't afford for him to not hear, not now, with Monica's laughter still echoing with Lily watching from below. But life, I've learned, doesn't care for your prayers. Admiral Callahan began to speak, his voice low and steady, weaving stories of service, of sacrifice, of unseen heroes. Each word pulled me back to briefing rooms, lit by flickering bulbs, to nights without sleep, to choices that left scars no one could see. My fingers tightened around my purse, my nails digging into the leather. I closed my eyes, willing the memories to fade, but they lingered vivid and unrelenting. When I opened my eyes, he was scanning the crowd, his gaze deliberate, searching. My stomach twisted. "No," I thought. "Not now. Please." And then he spoke my name. Not Ava Miller. The other name. The one I hadn't heard in decades, the one tied to a woman I'd buried beneath years of silence. "Codename Vanguard," he said, his voice clear, carrying a reverence that silenced the room. "Is she here tonight?" The gymnasium fell still. The applause died. Every head turned, eyes wide, searching. Monica's wine glass hung frozen in her hand, her mouth open. The usher's clipboard slipped clattering to the floor. Lily near the stage stared at me, her expression a mix of confusion and something else, wonder maybe. I sat, my heart hammering the sound so loud I thought it might break me open. I wanted to vanish, to slip through the cracks in the floor, to be anywhere but here. But there was no running from this. Not anymore. The silence stretched heavy, expectant. Callahan's eyes found mine, and in them I saw recognition, respect, a weight I hadn't felt in years. My hands trembled, but I didn't move. I couldn't. The truth I'd hidden for so long was unraveling, and I wasn't ready. The gymnasium was a tomb of silence, every eye on me, their stares like needles against my skin. Admiral Callahan stood on the stage, his voice still echoing my codename Vanguard, a word I hadn't heard in 20 years. My heart thundered a wild rhythm, threatening to break free, but I sat frozen. My hands clenched in my lap, my face a mask of calm. Lily's eyes found mine from across the room, wide with questions, her certificate forgotten in her hands. Monica, the PTA president, gaped, her wine glass trembling. I wanted to shrink, to vanish into the shadows I'd spent years perfecting, but there was no escape. Not now. The past I'd buried was clawing its way to the surface, and I wasn't ready for it to breathe. I closed my eyes just for a moment, and the gymnasium faded. Another room took its place, one with concrete walls lit by a single bulb swinging overhead. I was 25, my hair cropped short, my body lean and hard from months of training. The air smelled of sweat and gun oil, and my boots echoed on the floor as I stood before a line of recruits. They were young, their faces taut with fear and ambition, their eyes locked on me. "You don't get to fail," I'd said, my voice low, unyielding. "Not here. Not with what's at stake." They'd nodded, their breaths uneven, and I'd felt the weight of their trust, their lives settle on my shoulders. I was Vanguard then, a name whispered in the halls of power, a trainer who turned raw recruits into shadows that kept the world safe. The memory dissolved, and I was back in the gymnasium, the silence pressing against me. My fingers twitched, aching for the weight of a radio, a weapon, anything to ground me. But all I had was my purse, its leather worn smooth, and the truth I'd sworn to keep silent. I'd made that vow for Lily to give her a life untouched by the dangers I'd known. Yet here I was, exposed the fragile walls I'd built, crumbling under Callahan's gaze. Another flash, a desert night, the sky black and endless, the air thick with dust. I was crouched behind a crumbling wall, my pulse steady despite the chaos. The radio crackled in my ear, a voice urgent, clipped. Vanguard, we're pinned. Extractions compromised. I'd exhaled, my mind racing mapping routes, calculating risks. Hold position. I'd said, my voice calm, a lifeline in the dark. I'm coming. I'd moved then, silent and swift, through alleys where death waited. I'd brought them out, 3 agents, bloodied but alive. That was the night I'd earned my codename, the night I'd learned what it meant to carry lives in my hands. I opened my eyes, my breath shallow. The gymnasium was still there, the crowd still staring, but the weight of that desert night lingered heavy in my bones. I'd left that life behind, traded it for bake sales and library shifts, for a daughter who deserved better than a mother who lived in shadows. But the past doesn't let go so easily. It lives in your spine, in the way you walk, in the instincts you can't unlearn. I'd tried to forget, to become Ava Miller, the nobody. Sometimes, though, I forgot I was ever anything but forgotten. Callahan was still on the stage, his eyes locked on me, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He knew. He remembered. I wanted to shake my head to beg him to stop, but my body wouldn't move. The crowd began to murmur their whispers, a low hum like static before a storm. Monica leaned forward, her voice sharp, disbelieving. Ava. There's no way. Her friends nodded, their laughter gone replaced by confusion. Lily took a step toward me, her brow furrowed, and I felt a pang of guilt. She didn't know. I'd never told her. How could I? How do you tell your child you were someone else, someone who carried secrets that could break the world? Another memory surged, uninvited, a sterile room, a table strewn with classified files, my hands steady as I briefed a room of suits and uniforms. I was 30, my codename already a legend, my presence enough to silence chatter. The operation hinges on precision, I'd said, my voice cutting through the tension. One mistake, and we lose everything. They'd listened, their eyes on me, not daring to blink. I'd trained them, Callahan among them, a young officer, then all fire and questions, his notebook filled with my words. I'd shaped him, taught him to think 3 steps ahead to survive the unsurvivable. He'd called me ma'am with a respect that felt like armor. That was the last time I'd seen him before I walked away, before I chose silence over glory. The gymnasium's fluorescent lights buzzed, pulling me back. My hands were damp, my dress sticking to my skin. I'd spent years perfecting this life, quiet, small, safe. I'd learned to nod at insults, to smile when they called me nobody, to let their pity slide off me like rain. But now, with Callahan's voice ringing in my ears, that life felt like a lie. I wasn't just Ava Miller. I was Vanguard, and the truth was a weight I couldn't carry alone anymore. I thought of the nights I'd sat alone after Lily was asleep, my fingers tracing the edges of a locked box under my bed. Inside were relics of that other life, a commendation letter unsigned, a photograph, faces blurred, a badge I hadn't touched in years. I'd open it sometimes just to remember to feel the woman I'd been. But I'd always lock it away again, afraid of what it meant, afraid of who I might become if I let her out. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, their eyes darting between me and Callahan. He raised a hand, silencing them, his presence a quiet command. Vanguard, he said again, softer now, but no less firm. She trained me. She saved lives. She's the reason I'm standing here. The words landed like stones, each one heavier than the last. Monica's face paled, her glass slipping to the table. The usher fumbled with her clipboard, her cheeks red. Lily's lips parted her eyes, searching mine for answers I wasn't ready to give. I wanted to stand to speak to tell them they were wrong, that I was just Ava, just a mother. But my legs wouldn't move. My throat was dry, my voice lost somewhere deep. Another flash, a hospital room, the beep of monitors, my arm bandaged my body, aching. I'd been 32 fresh from a mission gone wrong, one I'd survived by sheer will. The doctor had warned me to rest, but I'd been back in the field a week later, training others pushing through pain. "You're unbreakable," Callahan had said, then half in awe. I hadn't felt unbreakable. I'd felt alone. Now in the gymnasium, that loneliness was a tide pulling me under. I'd given everything, my youth, my safety, my heart, to a life I could never speak of. And for what? To sit in the back, to be mocked, to be invisible. I looked at Lily, at the confusion in her eyes, and my chest ached. She deserved to know her mother. Not the shadow, but the woman who'd fought, who'd bled, who'd carried the weight of a nation's secrets. Callahan stepped closer to the edge of the stage, his eyes never leaving mine. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low, respectful. "We owe you more than words can say." The room was a blur now, faces and lights melting together. My hands trembled, and for the first time in years I felt the weight of who I was, not the nobody, but the woman I'd tried to forget. Vanguard, trainer, survivor. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if I could face it. But as the crowd waited their silence, a heavy thing I knew, one truth: the past wasn't done with me. And maybe I wasn't done with it either. The gymnasium silence was a living thing pressing against me, heavy with shock and curiosity. Admiral Callahan's words, my codename Vanguard, spoken with reverence, hung in the air, a truth I'd spent decades burying. My hands trembled in my lap, my navy dress damp with sweat, but I kept my face still, my eyes fixed on the floor. Lily stood near the stage, her gaze locked on me, her expression a tangle of confusion and awe. Monica, the PTA president, sat rigid, her wine glass forgotten, her lips parted, as if she could will the moment undone. The crowd's whispers began to stir, a low hum of disbelief, but I barely heard them. My heart was a drum, each beat a reminder of the life I'd left behind, now clawing its way into the light. I wanted to stand, to run, to tell them it was a mistake, but my body wouldn't move. My throat was tight, my voice lost in the weight of years spent silent. Callahan's eyes held mine from the stage, steady, respectful, and I saw the young officer he'd been eager, untested, hanging on my every word in a briefing room long ago. He'd called me ma'am then, and now 20 years later, he'd called me Vanguard. The word was a key unlocking doors I'd sealed shut, and I wasn't ready for what lay behind them. The principal cleared his throat, his voice shaky as he tried to regain control. Thank you, Admiral Callahan, for that inspiring introduction. Let's, continue with the awards." The crowd shifted chairs creaking, but their eyes stayed on me, their whispers sharper now, slicing through the applause. I forced my hands to unclench my fingers stiff and smoothed my dress. I had to stay calm. For Lily. For myself. I'd survived worse than this missions where one wrong step meant death nights, where the weight of secrets kept me from sleep. I could survive a room full of stares. But surviving isn't the same as living. And I'd been surviving for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to be whole. The ceremony stumbled forward, students' names called, certificates handed out. I sat in my folding chair, the gym mats beside me smelling faintly of rubber and dust. Monica's voice carried again, quieter now, but no less venomous. "It's ridiculous," she muttered to her friend. "Ava Miller. Some kind of hero, she's nobody. Probably a mix-up." Her friend nodded, her earrings glinting as she stole a glance at me. I didn't flinch. I'd heard it all before, spinster burden invisible. The words had long since lost their sting, or so I told myself. But tonight, with Callahan's voice still ringing in my ears, they landed differently, like salt in a wound I'd thought was healed. I thought of the years I'd spent in this town building a life for Lily. The mornings I'd walked her to school, her small hand in mine, her laughter brighter than the sun. The evenings I'd spent at the library shelving books, nodding at patrons who barely saw me. The countless school events, plays, recitals, parent nights, where I'd stood in the back, ignored or pitied. Poor Ava, they'd say if they said anything at all, raising that girl alone. No wonder she's so plain. I'd learned to smile through it, to let their words slide off me, to focus on Lily's happiness. But each slight, each dismissal was a stone added to the weight I carried, and some days it was heavier than others. A younger woman, maybe 30, approached me after the ceremony, her heels clicking on the gymnasium floor. She was one of Monica's crowd, her hair sleek, her dress expensive. "Ava Wright," she said, her smile too bright, her eyes sharp with curiosity. That was something. Vanguard. Is that like real? Her tone was light, but there was an edge to it, a challenge. I looked at her, my face calm, my voice steady. "It's just a name," I said softly. "Excuse me." I stepped past her, my purse clutched tight, and made my way to Lily, who was waiting near the stage, her certificate crumpled in her hands. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What was that? What did he mean?" Her eyes searched mine, and I felt a pang of guilt so sharp it stole my breath. I wanted to tell her everything, the missions, the sacrifices, the woman I'd been, but the words wouldn't come. Not here, not yet. Later, I said, touching her arm, "I promise." She nodded, but her expression was uncertain, and I hated myself for the secrets I'd kept, even if they were for her. Outside, the night air was cool, the parking lot lit by harsh sodium lights. Parents milled around, their voices loud, their laughter grating. I walked Lily to our car. My steps measured my head high despite the stairs. Monica and her friends stood near a sleek SUV, their whispers following me like smoke. "She's still just Ava," one of them said loud enough to carry. "Doesn't change a thing." I opened the car door for Lily, my hand steady, and didn't look back. I'd learned long ago that responding gave them power. Silence was my shield, even if it cost me pieces of myself. At home, Lily went to her room, her door closing softly. I stood in the kitchen, the house quiet, except for the hum of the fridge. My hands shook as I filled a glass with water, the cold biting my fingers. I thought of the countless times I'd stood in this spot, swallowing pain, burying memories. The time Monica had cornered me at a bake sale, her voice dripping with pity. "You must be so lonely, Ava. No family, no prospects." I'd smiled, handed her a brownie, and said nothing. Or the parent-teacher conference where a younger mother had laughed, calling me the librarian who never left high school. I'd nodded my eyes on Lily's report card, my heart a stone. I was kind always. I brought casseroles to potlucks, volunteered at school, events, helped neighbors with groceries. Not because I wanted their approval, but because kindness was all I had left to give. It was my way of proving I was still here, still human, even if they couldn't see me. But kindness doesn't erase pain. It just buries it deeper until the weight feels like part of you. I sank into a chair, my glass untouched, and let my mind drift. I thought of the younger women in town, the ones who moved through life with a brightness I'd lost. They were teachers, lawyers, mothers with thriving careers, their voices loud at meetings, their laughter easy. They looked through me, their eyes sliding past as if I were furniture. Old Maid One had called me once, not realizing I'd overheard. I'd kept walking, my arms full of library books, my face blank. But the word had stayed a splinter under my skin. I wondered sometimes what they'd say if they knew, if they saw the scars on my shoulder hidden under my cardigans from a mission that nearly ended me, if they heard the stories I could never tell of nights spent in safe houses, of decisions that saved lives, of losses that broke me. But I'd sworn an oath, not just to my country, but to myself. To protect Lily. To keep the past where it belonged. So I endured day after day letting them call me nobody, letting them believe I was nothing. But Callahan's voice had changed something. Vanguard. The name was a spark igniting memories I couldn't outrun. I thought of the last mission I'd led, the one that had ended my career. A hostage crisis, a ticking clock, a choice no one should have to make. I'd saved them all, but it had cost me my health, my future, my place in that world. I'd walked away, my body bruised, my heart heavy, and become Ava Miller, the mother, the nobody. I'd thought it was enough. But tonight, with Lily's questions and the crowd stares, I wasn't sure anymore. I stood my legs unsteady and walked to my bedroom. Under the bed was a locked box, its edges worn from years of hiding. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew what was inside a badge, a letter, a life I'd left behind. I sat on the floor, my back against the bed, and let the silence hold me. I was Ava Miller, but I was also Vanguard. And for the first time in years, I wondered if I could be both. Tomorrow, there'd be another event, a community gala one I'd nearly skipped. But Lily had begged me to go, her eyes bright with hope. I'd agreed not for myself, but for her. I didn't know what waited there, but I felt it coming, a tide I couldn't stop. For now, I closed my eyes, the weight of the night settling over me, and tried to remember how to breathe. The invitation sat on my kitchen counter for a week, its gold-embossed letters mocking me. Annual Community Gala, it read, promising an evening of celebration, unity, and recognition. I tossed it aside the moment it arrived, knowing I didn't belong in rooms filled with glittering dresses and self-assured laughter, but Lily had found it, her eyes bright, with a hope I couldn't refuse. "Please, Mom," she'd said, her voice soft but insistent. "It'll be fun. We can go together." I'd looked at her, 16 and fearless, and felt my resolve crumble. For her, I'd go. For her, I'd face another night of whispers and pity. Now, standing in front of my bedroom mirror, I smoothed the lines of my black dress, simple but elegant, its fabric cool against my skin. My hair was pinned up, a few strands falling loose, and I wore no jewelry except a thin silver bracelet Lily had given me years ago. I looked presentable, not radiant, not remarkable, just enough to blend in, or so I hoped. My hands shook as I adjusted my shawl, the weight of the school ceremony still heavy in my chest. Admiral Callahan's voice, Vanguard, echoed in my mind, a ghost I couldn't shake. I hadn't told Lily the truth yet, though her questions lingered in every glance she sent my way. Tonight, I wanted to be just her mother, not the woman with a past that threatened to unravel us both. The gala was held at the town's community center, a sprawling building with chandeliers and polished floors, transformed for the night into a stage for the town's pride. I parked my car at the edge of the lot, the gravel crunching under my heels, and took Lily's arm as we walked toward the entrance. She wore a blue dress, her hair loose, her smile wide enough to light the night. "You look beautiful, Mom," she said, squeezing my hand. I smiled, my throat tight, and wished I could see myself through her eyes. Inside, the air was warm, thick with perfume, and the hum of voices. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter rose and fell, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. The room was a sea of faces, business owners, teachers, council members, all dressed in their finest, their confidence a wall I could never breach. Lily tugged me forward, eager to explore, but I felt the familiar weight of eyes, their glances sliding over me, dismissing me, before they even registered my face. I was Ava Miller, the nobody, the woman who didn't matter. We reached the seating area, rows of tables draped in white linen, each with a name card in elegant script. Lily's name was there near the front, a nod to her recent award. Mine was nowhere. I scanned the tables, my fingers tightening around my purse, hoping for a mistake, a forgotten card. A young woman in a red dress, one of the event organizers, approached her, smile professional but cold. "Miss Miller, right?" She said, her eyes flickering over me. "I'm so sorry we didn't. Well, we assumed you wouldn't be attending, but I'm sure we can find you a spot somewhere." She gestured vaguely toward the back where a few folding chairs sat against the wall, half hidden by a potted plant. Lily's smile faltered, her hand tightening on mine. "Mom, that's not fair," she whispered, her voice sharp with indignation. I squeezed her hand, my face calm. "It's fine, sweetheart," I said softly. "Go sit. I'll be right here." She hesitated, her eyes searching mine, but I nodded, urging her forward. She went, reluctance in every step, and I made my way to the back, my heels clicking on the floor, my heart a stone in my chest. The chair was wobbly, its metal frame cold, and I sat, my shawl draped over my shoulders, my purse a small anchor in my lap. The gala began with speeches, tributes to local heroes, awards for charity work, praise for the town's bright future. I listened, my eyes on Lily, who clapped politely at her table, her glances darting back to me. The crowd was rapt, their faces glowing with pride, but I felt the familiar sting of invisibility. Monica was there, of course, at a prime table near the stage, her laughter loud, her dress sparkling under the chandeliers. She hadn't seen me yet, but her voice carried sharp and familiar. "Some people just don't belong at events like this," she said to her table, her words slicing through the music. "They drag the whole thing down." Her friends nodded, their eyes scanning the room, and I knew without looking that she meant me. I kept my hands folded, my face blank, but inside I was fraying. I thought of the school ceremony, of Callahan's voice, of the truth that had slipped free. Vanguard. I'd spent years burying her, convincing myself I could be just Ava, just a mother. But the weight of that name was a tide pulling me back to who I'd been. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I was elsewhere, sand under my boots, a radio crackling lives depending on my next move. I'd been unbreakable then or so, they'd said. Now, sitting in this folding chair, I felt like glass one crack away from shattering. A younger woman approached, her dress a vibrant green, her smile wide but insincere. She was one of Monica's crowd, her hair sleek, her confidence ablade. "Ava, right," she said, her voice syrupy. "I heard about the school thing. That codename nonsense. Quite a story." Her eyes glittered, daring me to confirm it. I looked at her, my expression steady, my voice soft. It was nothing I said, just a misunderstanding. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and leaned closer. "Oh, come on, you some kind of spy, you're the librarian. Stick to what you're good at." She turned away, her laughter trailing behind her, and I felt the words settle like ash in my chest. I could have told her. I could have spoken of the nights I'd spent in safe houses, the missions that left scars, the lives I'd saved. But what would it change? She'd laugh, call it a fantasy, and I'd be left with the same hollow ache. So I stayed silent, my hands gripping my purse, my eyes on the stage. The speeches dragged on the crowd's applause, a dull roar. Lily glanced back at me, her brow furrowed, and I forced a smile, not wanting her to see the pain I carried. I almost hadn't come tonight. I'd stood in my kitchen, the invitation in my hand, ready to tear it up. I'd pictured staying home, curling up with a book, letting the world forget me. But Lily's voice had echoed, "Please, Mom," and I'd known I couldn't say no. Not to her. She was the reason I'd left that life, the reason I'd traded power for peace. But peace, I was learning, came at a cost, and I was paying it every day. The gala's host took the stage, his voice booming. "We have a special guest tonight," he said, pausing for effect. "A leader who served our nation with distinction. Please welcome Admiral James Callahan, Director of Homeland Security." The room erupted, hands clapping, heads turning. My breath caught my hands freezing in my lap. Callahan again. Here. The coincidence felt like fate or a trap. He stepped into the spotlight, his uniform crisp, his presence a quiet command. The crowd leaned forward, eager, but I sank back, my heart racing, willing the shadows to hide me. I hadn't expected to see him again, not after the school ceremony, not after he'd torn open my past. I prayed he wouldn't notice me, wouldn't speak my name. But as he began to talk, his voice steady, recounting stories of service and sacrifice, I felt the weight of his gaze searching the room. My fingers tightened around my bracelet, the silver cool against my skin. No, I thought. Not again. Not here. But the tide was coming and I couldn't stop it. The room buzzed with anticipation, Monica's laughter fading, Lily's eyes wide. And I sat, my heart a drum, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. The community center's chandeliers cast a soft glow, their light dancing on the polished floor, but the air felt heavy, charged, as if the room itself held its breath. Admiral James Callahan stood on the stage, his uniform sharp, his voice a steady current, weaving tales of sacrifice and unseen heroes. The crowd was rapt, their applause rising and falling, their faces alight with pride. I sat in my folding chair at the back, half hidden by a potted plant, my hands clenched around my purse, my heart a wild thing in my chest. I'd prayed he wouldn't see me, wouldn't speak my name again, not after the school ceremony had torn open my past, but his presence here so soon after felt like a reckoning I couldn't escape. My black dress clung to my skin, damp with sweat, and the silver bracelet on my wrist, Lily's gift, felt like a tether grounding me. Lily sat at a table near the front, her blue dress catching the light, her eyes darting back to me with a mix of worry and wonder. She still didn't know the truth, not fully, though Callahan's words at the school Vanguard had planted questions I hadn't answered. Monica, the PTA president, laughed at her prime table, her voice sharp, oblivious to the storm brewing. Ava's probably hiding back there, she said loud enough to carry pretending she's someone. Her friends tittered their glasses, clinking, and I kept my face blank, my hands still, though the words burned like acid. I was Ava Miller, the nobody, the librarian, the mother who didn't matter. That's what they saw, what they'd always seen. But Callahan's voice, his gaze, had stirred something else. Vanguard, the woman I'd buried, the operative who'd trained men like him, who'd carried secrets that shaped the world. I'd spent years silencing her, choosing this small life for Lily's sake. But now, with every word he spoke, she was clawing her way back, and I didn't know how to stop her. He paused, his hands resting on the podium, his eyes scanning the room. The crowd leaned forward, eager for his next story, but I sank deeper into my chair, willing the shadows to swallow me. My fingers traced the bracelet's edge, the metal cool, and I thought of the locked box under my bed, the badge, the letter, the life I'd left behind. I'd been so careful, so quiet for so long, but careful doesn't stop fate. "Ladies and gentlemen," Callahan said, his voice dropping, deliberate, "there's someone here tonight who deserves our gratitude more than I can say." The room stilled, the quartet's music fading, the clink of glasses gone. My stomach twisted, a cold dread pooling inside me. No, I thought, my pulse racing. Not again. He stepped from behind the podium, his movements measured, his presence commanding. "She's not one for the spotlight," he continued, "but her work, her sacrifice has saved lives, has shaped this nation." The crowd murmured, heads turning, searching for the hero he described. Monica's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing. Lily sat straighter, her hands clasped, her gaze flickering between Callahan and me. I gripped my purse tighter, my nails digging into the leather, willing my body to stay still, my face to stay calm. But my heart was a drum, each beat louder, threatening to crack me open. Callahan's eyes found mine, and the room seemed to shrink, the chandelier's light dimming, until it was just him and me. His expression softened, a flicker of recognition, of respect, and I saw the young officer he'd been eager, untested, scribbling my words in a notebook, calling me ma'am with awe. 20 years had passed, but that look hadn't changed. I wanted to shake my head to beg him to stop, but my body wouldn't move. My throat was dry, my voice lost in the weight of years spent silent. He stepped off the stage, his boots echoing on the floor, and the crowd parted their whispers, a low hum. "Ma'am," he said, his voice clear, carrying across the room. "We've been looking for you." The words landed like a thunderclap, and every head turned eyes wide, searching. Monica's glass slipped splashing wine on the tablecloth. The young woman in the green dress who'd mocked me earlier froze, her laughter gone. Lily's lips parted, her eyes locked on me, a question forming she didn't know how to ask. I sat, my hands trembling, my breath shallow. The folding chair creaked under me, the potted plant's leaves brushing my shoulder, and I felt exposed raw like a wound laid bare. I wanted to stand, to run, to tell him he was wrong, that I was just Ava, just a mother. But his gaze held me steady, unyielding, and I saw the truth in it. He knew me not, the nobody, but the woman I'd been. Vanguard, trainer, survivor. He walked toward me, the crowd parting further, their murmurs rising. "This woman," he said, his voice firm but warm, trained some of the finest agents this country has known. She taught us what it means to serve, to sacrifice, to stand when others fall. He was closer now, his steps deliberate, his uniform catching the light. The room was a blur, faces and voices melting together, but his presence was an anchor pulling me back to a life I'd tried to forget. I thought of the training grounds, the desert heat, the recruits' faces, as I pushed them past their limits. "You don't break," I told them, my voice a blade. "Not when lives depend on you." Callahan had been one of them, young and fierce, his questions sharp, his determination a fire I'd helped shape. I'd taught him to survive, to think, to lead. And now, here he was, a leader of men, walking toward me, ready to pull me from the shadows I'd chosen. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes never leaving mine. "Ma'am," he said again, softer now, almost a whisper. "You don't belong in the back." The words were a knife cutting through the years of silence, the years of being nobody. The crowd gasped, their whispers a storm now, but I barely heard them. My hands shook my bracelet, glinting under the chandeliers, and I felt Lily's gaze heavy with wonder, heavy with questions. Monica stood her chair, scraping her face, pale. "This is absurd," she said, her voice loud, trembling. "Ava Miller. She's nobody." The word hung in the air, sharp, final, and for a moment I felt it land heavy as ever. But Callahan didn't flinch. He turned to her, his expression calm but unyielding. "You're mistaken," he said, his voice low, a warning. "She's the reason I'm here. The reason many of us are." The room fell silent again, the weight of his words settling over us. Monica sank back into her chair, her hands fumbling with her napkin. The young woman in the green dress stared, her mouth open, her confidence shattered. Lily stood now, her table forgotten, her eyes wide, and I wanted to go to her to explain, but my legs wouldn't move. I was caught suspended between who I was and who I'd been, the truth a tide I couldn't hold back. Callahan extended a hand, a gesture both formal and intimate, inviting me to stand. "Please," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Let us honor you." My heart stuttered, my breath catching. I looked at his hand, at the room, at Lily, and felt the weight of every choice I'd made, every mission, every sacrifice, every night I'd chosen, silence over glory. I didn't want this. I didn't want their eyes, their whispers, their reverence, but I saw the pride in Callahan's gaze, the confusion in Lily's, and I knew I couldn't stay hidden forever. I stood, my legs unsteady, my dress rustling softly. The crowd watched, their silence a heavy thing, and I felt exposed, vulnerable, but also something else seen. For the first time in years, I was seen. I took a step forward, my hand hovering, not quite touching Callahan's, and the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what came next. The community center was a sea of silence, the chandelier's light frozen in their glow, as if time itself had paused. Admiral James Callahan stood before me, his hand extended, his eyes steady with a respect that felt like a weight I wasn't ready to carry. My black dress clung to my skin, my silver bracelet, Lily's gift, glinting faintly, and my legs trembled as I stood caught in the gaze of a room that had never seen me. The crowd was still, their breaths held their whispers, silenced by the impossible truth unfolding. Lily watched from her table, her blue dress a beacon, her eyes wide with questions I hadn't answered. Monica, the PTA president, sat rigid. Her wine-stained napkin crumpled her face, pale with disbelief. I wanted to shrink, to slip back into the shadows, but Callahan's presence was a tide pulling me forward, and I couldn't resist its pull. "Ma'am," he said again, his voice low but resonant, carrying across the room like a command. "You don't belong in the back. Not you. Not Vanguard." The word, my codename, landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through the crowd. Gasps broke the silence. Chairs creaked and eyes widened, searching my face for answers I wasn't ready to give. I shook my head, a small, instinctive gesture, my voice barely a whisper. "Please," I said, "I'm just Ava." But the words felt hollow, a lie I'd told myself for too long. Callahan's expression didn't waver. He stepped closer, his boots echoing on the polished floor, and raised his voice not in volume but in reverence. "Ava Miller, codename Vanguard senior operative and lead trainer, United States Homeland Security." The title was a blade cutting through the years of silence, and the room froze. Monica's glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the table, the sound sharp and final. The young woman in the green dress who'd mocked me earlier covered her mouth, her eyes darting to her friends in panic. Lily stood now, her hands clasped her face, a mix of awe and confusion, and my heart ached for the truth I'd kept from her. I tried again, my voice trembling, my hands raised as if to push the moment away. "It was a long time ago," I said louder now, desperate to deflect, to stay small. "I'm just a mother now, just Lily's mom." But Callahan shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips, and the crowd murmured their voices, a low storm of shock and curiosity. He turned to them, his presence commanding his words, deliberate. "This woman trained me," he said, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the room again. "She trained dozens of U.S. agents, operatives, leaders. She taught us to survive, to protect, to serve. Her missions saved lives. Her sacrifices built the security we stand on today." The words were a flood washing over me, pulling me back to a life I'd buried. I closed my eyes and the room dissolved, replaced by a memory so vivid it stole my breath. I was 32, crouched in a war-torn city, the air thick with smoke, the ground shaking with distant explosions. A hostage crisis, a diplomatic team trapped, and I was the only one close enough to act. The radio crackled, voices frantic, but my mind was clear, my hands steady. "Vanguard. It's a suicide run," my commander had said, his voice tight. "You can't. I'd cut him off. I can." I'd said already, moving my rifle a familiar weight, my heart a drum of purpose. I'd slipped through the chaos, silent and swift, neutralizing threats, guiding the hostages to safety. 12 lives saved, but not without cost. A bullet had grazed my shoulder, leaving a scar I still hid, and the strain had fractured something deeper, my health, my future in the field. I'd walked away from that mission bloodied but alive, and soon after I'd walked away from everything, choosing Lily over the life I'd known. The memory faded, and I was back in the community center, Callahan's voice pulling me to the present. "She's a hero," he said, his eyes on me, his words a vow, "and it's time we honored her." The crowd erupted, not in applause, but in a stunned, reverent silence. Their eyes locked on me, seeing me for the first time. I felt exposed raw, like a wound laid bare, and my hands shook as I clasped them together, my bracelet catching the light. I wanted to tell him to stop, to let me stay Ava, but the truth was out, and it was heavier than I'd imagined. Monica stood her chair, scraping her voice shrill with disbelief. This can't be right, she said, her hands gesturing wildly. Ava the librarian. She's nobody. The word was a slap echoing the years of scorn, and for a moment I felt it land sharp and familiar. But Callahan turned to her, his gaze cold, unyielding. You don't know her, he said, his voice low, a warning. You never did. Monica sank back. Her face flushed her hands, fumbling with her napkin, and the room seemed to shift, the air charged with a new respect. Lily took a step toward me, her eyes glistening, her certificate forgotten at her table. Mom, she whispered, her voice breaking, and I wanted to go to her to hold her to explain, but my feet were rooted, my body caught between past and present. Callahan extended his hand again, his gesture formal, almost ceremonial. Please, Vanguard, he said, his voice soft but firm. Come forward. The crowd watched their silence, a heavy thing, and I felt the weight of every choice I'd made, every mission, every scar, every night I'd chosen silence for Lily's sake. I took a step, then another, my heels clicking on the floor, my dress rustling softly. The room was a blur, faces and lights melting together, but Callahan's gaze was steady, anchoring me. I reached him, my hand hovering, not quite taking his, and he nodded a small, knowing gesture. You taught me everything he said, his voice low, meant for me alone. Thank you. The words were a spark, igniting something deep, and for the first time in years, I felt the woman I'd been Vanguard, not just Ava, stirring inside me. The crowd began to stand one by one, their chairs scraping their faces, a mix of awe and shame. The young woman in the green dress looked away, her cheeks red. Monica's friends whispered, their eyes darting to me, then to the floor. Lily moved closer. Her hands clasped, her smile tentative but proud, and I felt a tear slip down my cheek, unbidden, unstoppable. I wiped it away, my fingers trembling, and Callahan stepped back, giving me the space to stand alone. I didn't want this. Their eyes, their reverence, their regret. I'd chosen this life, this silence for Lily, for peace. But as I stood there, the weight of Vanguard settling over me, I realized something had changed. I wasn't just the nobody anymore. I was both Ava and Vanguard mother, an operative broken and whole. And for the first time, I wondered if I could carry both without breaking. Callahan raised a hand, silencing the murmurs, and turned to the crowd. This is what service looks like, he said, his voice clear, resolute. This is what sacrifice means. We owe her more than we can repay. He looked at me, his eyes warm, and I saw the young officer again, the one who'd trusted me, who'd learned from me. I nodded a small gesture and felt the past and present collide, a quiet, powerful moment that changed everything. The community center was a cathedral of silence, the chandelier's light soft but unyielding, casting shadows that seemed to bow. I stood before Admiral James Callahan, my black dress a quiet armor, my silver bracelet, Lily's gift, cool against my wrist. His words, Vanguard senior operative and lead trainer, still hung in the air, a truth that had shattered the room's fragile order. The crowd was on its feet, their faces a tapestry of awe, shame, and disbelief, their eyes locked on me, seeing me for the first time. Lily stood close, her blue dress catching the light. Her hands clasped, her eyes glistening with pride and questions. Monica, the PTA president, sat frozen at her table, her wine-stained napkin, a crumpled confession, her face drained of its usual scorn. I wanted to shrink, to slip back into the shadows I'd mastered, but the weight of their gazes held me, and I stood exposed, yet strangely whole. Callahan's hand was still extended, a gesture of honor, but I hadn't taken it. My hands trembled, clasped together, and I felt the pulse of my past Vanguard beating alongside the present. Ava, the mother, the nobody. His eyes, warm with respect, held mine, and I saw the young officer. He'd been the one I'd trained, the one who'd trusted me to lead him through fire. You taught us what it means to serve, he'd said, and now here he was, giving me back the truth I'd buried. I nodded a small, almost imperceptible movement and felt a tear slip down my cheek, hot and unbidden. I wiped it away, my fingers steady, but the room saw it, and their silence deepened a reverence I hadn't sought. The crowd's chairs scraped softly as they stood taller, their applause starting slow, then building a wave of sound that wasn't loud but heavy like a heartbeat. I didn't want it. Their claps, their stares, their sudden respect. I'd chosen this life, this silence for Lily, for peace, not for moments like this. But as I looked at Lily, her smile tentative but fierce, I realized she needed to see her mother as more than the woman in the back. And maybe I needed it too. Callahan stepped back, his presence still commanding, and raised his voice not to shout, but to anchor. "This is what sacrifice looks like," he said, his words clear, resolute. "This is what strength means. We stand here tonight because of her." The applause grew, but it was different now, not performative but earnest, a sound that carried weight. I kept my eyes on Callahan, then on Lily, avoiding the crowd, their faces too much to bear. I saw the young woman in the green dress who'd mocked me earlier, her head bowed, her hands twisting in her lap. I saw Monica's friends, their whispers gone, their eyes darting to the floor. And I saw Monica herself, standing now, her hands shaking her face, a mask of regret. She moved toward me, her steps hesitant, her dress sparkling under the chandeliers, but her confidence shattered. The crowd parted their eyes following her, and I felt a flicker of dread, not for her words, but for the confrontation I'd spent years avoiding. "Ava," she said, her voice loud enough to carry trembling with something between shame and defiance. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean." Her words faltered, her hands gesturing uselessly, and I saw the woman, she was small, suddenly stripped of her armor. The room watched, waiting for my response. Their silence, a pressure I could feel. I looked at her, my face calm, my eyes steady. I could have spoken, could have let the years of her scorn pour out the bake sales where she'd pitied me, the parent meetings, where she'd dismissed me, the countless times she'd called me nobody. I could have told her of the nights I'd spent in safe houses, the missions that left scars, the lives I'd saved. But what would it change? Her regret was hers to carry, not mine to fuel. I nodded a single deliberate gesture and said softly, "It's all right." The words were simple, almost too quiet, but they were enough. My silence spoke louder, a shield I'd honed over years, and I saw her flinch, her apology, unfinished, her face crumpling as she turned away. The crowd exhaled, their murmurs stirring, but I felt no triumph. Justice wasn't in her regret, wasn't in their applause. It was in standing here whole as both Ava and Vanguard, no longer hiding. I looked at Lily, who'd moved closer, her hand reaching for mine, and I took at her warmth, a lifeline. "Mom," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." My throat tightened, and I squeezed her hand, unable to speak the weight of her words, heavier than the crowd's reverence. Callahan cleared his throat, drawing the room's attention, and stepped forward again. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice low, ceremonial. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box, its surface worn but gleaming. The crowd leaned forward, their whispers fading, and I felt my heart stutter, a cold dread mixing with something else, recognition. He opened the box, revealing a medal, its ribbon deep blue, its surface etched with symbols I knew too well. "This was meant for you years ago," he said, his eyes on mine, his voice steady. "For the mission that changed everything. We never got to give it to you." My breath caught my mind, pulling me back to that war-torn city. The smoke, the hostages, the bullet in my shoulder. I'd saved them, but I'd walked away, refusing honors, choosing Lily over glory. I shook my head, my voice barely audible. "I don't need it," I said, my hands raised, instinctive. But Callahan's gaze was unyielding, and he stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. "You don't need it, ma'am, but we need to give it." He pinned the medal to my dress, his movements precise, and the crowd watched their silence absolute. Then he stepped back and saluted, his hand sharp against his brow, his posture rigid with respect. The gesture was a spark igniting the room, and others followed, men in suits, women in dresses, even the young woman in the green dress, their hands rising in uneven, heartfelt salutes. I stood, my hands at my sides, my eyes burning, and felt the weight of their honor, not as a burden, but as a bridge, connecting who I'd been to who I was. Lily's hand tightened in mine, her smile wide now, her tears falling freely. I looked at her, then at Callahan, then at the crowd, and felt something shift inside me, a quiet, powerful peace. I hadn't sought this moment, hadn't wanted it, but it was here, and I let it settle. Let it hold me. Monica stood at her table, her head bowed, her friends silent, and I felt no anger, only a strange, distant pity. They'd never know me, not fully, but they didn't need to. I knew myself, and that was enough. The applause began again, softer now, a sound like rain, and Callahan stepped back, giving me the stage, though I hadn't asked for it. I stood, my dress rustling, my medal heavy against my chest, and looked at Lily, at the future I'd chosen. This wasn't triumph, not the kind they expected. It was grace hard-won, and I carried it like the scars I'd earned, hidden but real. The community center's chandeliers dimmed as the gala wound down their light, softening like a sigh after a storm. The crowd's applause had faded, replaced by the murmur of voices and the clink of glasses, but the air still carried the weight of what had happened. I stood near the edge of the room, my black dress slightly creased, the metal pinned to it, heavy against my chest. My silver bracelet, Lily's gift, caught the fading light, a small reminder of why I'd chosen this life. Lily was beside me, her hand in mine, her blue dress rumpled but her smile steady, radiant with a pride I hadn't seen before. Admiral James Callahan had stepped away, his salute still vivid in my mind. His words, Vanguard senior operative, etched into the silence I'd carried for years. The crowd moved around us, their glances softer now, their whispers tinged with respect, but I felt no need to meet their eyes. I was Ava Miller, and I was Vanguard, and for the first time, I didn't need to choose between them. Lily squeezed my hand, her voice low, almost a whisper. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" Her eyes bright with tears held no blame, only a hunger to understand. I looked at her, my throat tight, and saw the girl I'd raised, the reason I'd left that other life behind. "I wanted you to be safe," I said softly. My words careful, deliberate, safe from the weight of it, from the danger. "You were my world, Lily, and I thought being just your mom was enough." She shook her head, her smile trembling. "You're more than enough. You're everything." My heart ached a sweet, heavy pain, and I pulled her close, her warmth a tether, grounding me in the present. The room was emptying now, couples drifting toward the exits, their laughter quieter, their steps slower. Monica lingered at her table. Her wine-stained napkin abandoned her face, a mask of unease. She didn't approach again, didn't try to speak, and I was glad. Her apology at the gala's peak, faltering and incomplete, had been enough. I didn't need her regret, didn't need her to understand. The young woman in the green dress who'd mocked me earlier passed by her head, bowed her eyes, avoiding mine. I felt no anger, only a distant pity. They'd never know the nights I'd spent in safe houses, the scars I hid under my cardigans, the choices that had broken and rebuilt me. And they didn't need to. The truth was mine, and it was enough. Callahan stood near the stage, speaking with the gala's host, his uniform still crisp, his presence a quiet command. He caught my eye, and for a moment we were back in that briefing room 20 years ago. His notebook opened, my voice shaping his future. He nodded a small, respectful gesture, and I returned it, a silent acknowledgement of the bond we'd shared, the lives we'd touched. I didn't need his medal, didn't need the crowd's applause, but I carried his respect like a flame, small but steady, warming the parts of me I'd thought were lost. We left the community center, Lily and I, the night air cool against my skin, the stars sharp above the parking lot. The gravel crunched under my heels, and I felt the weight of the metal, the weight of Vanguard settle into something new. Not a burden, but a part of me woven into the fabric of who I was. Lily chattered beside me, her voice bright, recounting the gala, the crowd's faces, the moment Callahan had saluted. It was like a movie, Mom, she said, laughing softly. You were a hero up there. I smiled, my heart full, and didn't correct her. Hero was a word for others to use. I was just me, and that was enough. At home, the house was quiet. The kitchen lit by a single bulb, the hum of the fridge a familiar comfort. Lily went to her room, her steps light her door, closing softly. I stood in the silence, my hands steady now, the tremor of the gala gone. I thought of the years I'd spent here in this small house on Maple Street, building a life for Lily. The bake sales, the library, shifts, the school events, where I'd stood in the back invisible. I thought that life was all I had, all I could be. But tonight, with Callahan's words, with Lily's pride, I saw it differently. I hadn't lost Vanguard. She'd been there all along in my silence, in my strength, in the way I'd carried on. I walked to my bedroom, the floorboards creaking under my feet, and knelt beside the bed. The locked box was still there, its edges worn, its secrets untouched for years. I pulled it out, the metal cool against my fingers, and opened it, the key trembling in my hand. Inside was the badge, its surface dull but heavy with meaning. The commendation letter, unsigned, its words faded, and a small folded flag, a relic from a mission I'd never spoken of. I lifted the flag, its fabric soft, and held it to my chest, the memory of that day flooding back, a fallen colleague. A promise kept, a debt I'd paid in silence. I stood the flag in my hands and moved to the living room where a small table held Lily's school awards, her photos, our life together. I folded the flag, my movement slow, deliberate, each crease, a ritual, a closing. I learned to fold it years ago in a life where precision meant survival, and now it felt like a prayer, a way to honor both who I'd been and who I was. I placed it on the table beside Lily's latest certificate and stepped back, the weight of the night settling over me like a shawl. I thought of the crowd's faces, their shock, their reverence, and realized it hadn't changed me. I was still Ava, still the woman who shelved books, who walked Lily to school, who smiled through pity and scorn, but I was also Vanguard, and that truth lived in my spine, in the way I carried myself, in the choices I'd made. I didn't need to explain. It didn't need their approval. It was enough to know it, to feel it, to let it rest quietly within me. I sat on the couch, the house still, the world outside asleep. I looked at the flag, at Lily's awards, and felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Not triumph, not glory, but grace, hard-won and steady. I thought of you watching this, listening to my story, and I wanted to say something true, something that would stay with you. You don't need to explain your past to anyone. You don't need to prove your worth. It lives in your bones, in the steps you take, in the love you give. You are enough just as you are, and no one can take that from you. I stood, my dress rustling, and walked to the door, opening it to the night. The air was cool, the stars bright, and I stepped outside, my head high, my heart full. I didn't need to look back at the flag, at the medal, at the life I'd lived. It was all here in me, and I carried it forward one quiet step at a time. Hey, it's me, Ava. If this story's moved you, if you're feeling the power of a life reclaimed, please hit that subscribe button. It means everything to share this with you, to let you see the strength that lives in silence. Thank you for staying with me. This is my story, and it's yours now too.